Hey man, gotta see my new game, man. I've been playing this game for like forever. I'm on like level 90. My guy's absolutely insane, bro. I've unlocked every item, I've got every single weapon. You cannot, no one can defeat this guy. You wait till you see him, man. He is the she. No! Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at replacing a save battery in a SNES cartridge. Today we've got Terranigma here. This is actually a pretty rare game, pretty sought after, pretty expensive. But if you're confident with changing batteries, then there really should be no problem to change a battery in basically any game you want. It's an important thing, you need to do it. The batteries inside these games do not last forever, so you do have to change them. Otherwise, you basically just got yourself a paperweight because you can't actually play it. So don't have any fear changing these things. You know, if you have a little bit of practice with some sort of cheaper games first, then you can move on to do the more expensive one. It's a little bit more challenging than the last video I did showing you how to clean a cartridge. That's definitely something I would recommend anyone can do. This is probably something that might take a little bit more practice before you're confident to take it to a more expensive game. But I am by no means an expert. I am 100% amateur who is taught, self-taught, purely by just practice and watching internet videos. So please take anything I say with a pinch of salt and do your own research by more experts in the field. But I'm going to show you what I do to change a save battery and you know, how I feel confident with it at the end of the job. So kicking things off, we're going to need ourselves our Gamebit screwdriver. We mentioned this in the last video. This is a 3.8mm Gamebit screwdriver. It will cover all Nintendo consoles. Does it do the N64? I can't remember if that might be the slightly bigger one, which is the Mega Drive one. 4.5mm for the Mega Drive stuff. I think this one does the N64 as well, but it only does Super Nintendo, Game Boy and NES. So a couple of screws down the bottom here. Once they're out, I'm going to chuck them in this little container here, keep them safe. And again, to remove that cart, we simply got the little tabs here. Got the little tabs here and here. If you're looking, yeah, these are my own little end labels that I chuck on things. It's a bit tatty, this one, but anyway, little tabs here and here. Lift up, pull away, and it's off. Be careful not to lift up too far, guys. You could snap it. Right, so now we've got our board. Now, first things first, this is what we're going to be replacing. This bit here and here. This is the the battery. Those are the solder points. Here is our battery, and we can actually see on the battery a little code there, 9611. That is the year, so that would have been November 96 that this battery was designed or released, should I say. May not have been when it was actually soldered in, but that was when it was created, should I say. So I think we're now in 2023, so it's done over 20 years, and it's still going because I just tested it and there are some saves on there, but nonetheless, I'm not going to take any chances. I don't want to start a new game and then have it wiped halfway through, so it's time to replace that. So that's what we're going to get on with now. Okay guys, so now that we've got our board out and we're going to need to replace this battery, one thing we can actually quickly do is actually check the life of this battery. What we're going to do here is introduce our multimeter. This is a Q-Tech KT117, so it's, you know, sort of medium range, pretty decent multimeter, digital multimeter. There are better ones on the market, but I think this is a really good one. Anyway, we're going to be sticking it on voltage here. So this is a DC voltage, is what we want to check for, and basically we're going to take our connectors here. We've got a positive, we've got a negative, and we're going to stick them on the relative pins for our battery. Now if you look on this side, you can see positive. There's actually, I don't know if you can see that, but there is a plus on this side of the battery, and the little prong which is attached to this top side goes through to the other side here. So the bottom one is positive, which means obviously the other pin is negative. So positive is red, negative is black. We hold those on there, and let's see if we can get a reading on our multimeter. There we go, it's checking there, and we've got 3.87. That's actually, I think, a relatively reasonable reading. It's definitely dropped in a bit of life. I think mostly they should have sort of 3.3 something, 3.387, I think. We'll see when we get a new battery out now. So that is actually on its way out. That battery is dropping. It's definitely not completely gone, but it's on its way out. Okay, so here we have replacing batteries. I've got a bag of these. These have been ordered from AliExpress. Just got a big bulk order of these batteries. These are the CR2302. These are the sort of batteries that you're going to need to be replacing in pretty much all your cartridges. I think this goes through Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, Master System, N64. There's a slightly smaller size for the Game Boy. I can't remember what those ones are actually off the top of my head. But yeah, the C2032 is what we're going to be replacing. Now these yellow banded ones seem to be the most common that you find these days, especially when it comes to Super Nintendo or kind of any kind of game replacement batteries, if they're advertised as that. Some of them come with prongs that are slightly better than these ones. These are the slightly cheaper ones, and they've come with 2 equal size prongs, which makes the sort of slightly more challenging to determine which side is positive, which side is negative, as you will see, because the original one here has a fatter leg for positive and a thinner leg for negative, which makes that easier. Right, now before we move on to desoldering that battery, we're going to double check this battery, this new one, is actually got the right amount of juice in it. Now, same as before, to check the positive side, we can see that the positive here is on the top side with the writing on, and this prong is what's connected to the positive. So that is this one here on the left of screen, and the right of screen is a negative. So we shall test that now. There we go. Right, so there we go, 3.333, yeah. 3.3333, you saw it there for a second, my hand slipped off then. There we go, 3.334. That's a perfect battery, guys. That's what you want to see. So the last one we checked that was still in here has a bit of a drop. 3.0 it was registering. So we know that one needs replacing, to be honest with you. I'm very glad I did that because I didn't want to start a new walkthrough and then have to, a new playthrough and then have to start again, which is what happened to me with Lufia Temple of Doom. And I will not be letting that happen again. Right, we're at the soldering stage now, so I'm just going to tuck this battery over here and I'll run you through some gear that I'm using that you might find useful. First of all, of course, we're going to need soldering iron. I'm actually using a solder station, which is a Yihua 968DA3. I mean, I wouldn't know what is great solder station and what isn't. I think it price-wise, it was in the sort of just under 100 quid, and it's I find it for what I need it for, it's great. It's got the soldering iron, it's got a heat gun, it's got a smoke extractor, it's got adjustable temperature gauge, airflow control. Yeah, it's a handy little piece of kit really, and I mainly use the soldering iron, but the heat gun is also very useful for some things too. But you can pretty much use any soldering iron you like, and I would advise probably something that's got a temperature control. I'm currently running my soldering iron at 350 degrees Celsius, which I tend to find is a good starting point to work with lead-free solder. If you're using just the standard soldering iron, the one that you buy, the really cheap ones, the £10 ones that don't have any heat control, I don't know, I wouldn't advise that. You can have issues with those. As far as your iron goes itself, you want a smallish head on there. You don't want something that's too big, because you're going to be doing, it's not too delicate the work, but it's it's delicate-ish. The next thing we want to do is prepare our soldering iron. I've got this box of tip tinner here. It's a Thermaltronics. It's from Thermaltronics, but basically tip tinner is a solution that you can basically melt onto your soldering iron when it's hot like that, and it kind of just prepares the soldering end, and it just makes it much more much more conductive with the solder, which makes it a lot easier for removing soldering, actually for joining solder to contacts. So I definitely advise always doing a tip tinner before every session, as well as also cleaning down your soldering iron at the end of a session. Right, next things we're going to need is some solder. But before we get onto the soldering section, we're going to need to remove this battery. So some tools that I've got lined up here. Got myself some needle nose pliers. And this is a de-soldering gun. Again, this is by Engineer. It's called the Solder Sucker SS02, made in Japan. It's about 20 quid, I think, and I'm sure there's much better ones on the market, but this one for me does the job. If you've seen those ones that you seem to see everywhere in cheap packs, where it's like a blue shaft with a plastic sort of bit at the top, don't get it, guys. It's useless. I've seen it. It's a spring-loaded thing. It's garbage. If you use it 4 or 5 times, it'll break. Just don't waste your money, man. If you want to get a solder sucker, get something a bit more hearty. Like I said, this is a £20 job. It does the job a lot better. The way it works is you load the gun like that by pushing it in, and then you basically hold it up against a soldering joint that you're going to solder. You use your soldering iron with the other side to heat up the existing solder that's there, and then once it's hot, you can move your solder sucker in, press the button, and that should suck up any solder into the end of the gun, which you can then excrete like that by pushing it in again. It's just a good way of getting rid of solder, that's excess solder that's around the joint, which makes it easier to get the component that you want out. So we're going to make a start with that. Now, because I'm doing this live, a lot of the little screens that you see here popping up with bits that showing you other things, that's stuff that very often I've shot after. I obviously can't shoot this stuff after because I'm only going to be doing it once. So I'm going to do my best to bring here my little doctor's lamp, magnifying lamp, and try and get you an angle which will kind of show you what I'm doing. I hope it works. If not, apologies. But I hope you can kind of see what's going on there. It's going to be difficult for me to keep an eye on both the camera and this job at the same time, but I'll also do my best. Right, so I don't know if you can see that, but here on my soldering gun here, you can see a large bit of solder that's just been collected, and that basically is why a de-soldering gun is useful, because that has just taken that all out of this joint here. Sorry, this joint here, it's taken it all out, so there's a lot less solder in there now. We can try that with the one at the bottom as well. Same again, that's pretty much got all the solder out of those joints now. Alright, I think it's time to move on to the next stage. I'm going to move this away now, and I'm going to try and show you what I now do. So, come on, autofocus, help me out, there we go. Right, so what we're going to do now is we want to pull this battery off. Get a little grip with your fingertips on the battery, not too hard, and we're just going to heat up one side and pull. I've removed some solder now with the de-soldering gun, or solder sucker. That's helped, so now we can sort of hope that this is going to come out. Now you want to get a bit of a firm grip and just pull. There we go. How easy was that? That's come out. I've got another camera going. I've just set up another camera, so I'm hoping that I can get some sort of live action shots slightly better than I was doing before. So we can see that, yeah, this is sort of sticking half in and half out now. That's where we're up to. It's not fully out yet. It's very easy. We're just going to put some more solder back on that. Sorry, put the soldering iron back on that and just pull it out. Solder on there. Heat it and just pull. That's simple, guys. Really, really, really easy to do. Now, I haven't actually needed to really use my needle nose pliers here. Sometimes having a needle nose plier helps. Once you've sort of pried out the battery a little bit, you can kind of turn it over, and while it's sort of flat like this, but it's sticking out a little bit, you can get the needle nose plier under there, and not in any way try and force it out, but it's just a little way of hanging on to the battery. And I'll show you on this side like this. Having hold of the battery there, and you've got your hands free, and then you can kind of come in with the soldering iron on the top and apply some pressure. But I don't really need to do that this time. I'm not going to bother because, like I said, the batteries come out really easily. I just use my thumb here, hold on to it like this, and we can literally just apply a bit more apply a little bit more heat here to the top, and I'm just pulling with this hand, holding onto the battery. I'm just pulling the battery as I put my soldering iron against it here, and you can see it's kind of going out there. Don't leave it on there for too long. You don't want to heat the board up forever, but I mean, you know, just enough. There we go, it's out. Okay, so there we have our board. It's now battery free, and we can go about applying our next battery. Now, this has actually come off very nicely. The holes that have been left here, where the solder, where it used to come through, the holes where the new prongs are going to go through are nice and open, so there's plenty of room to put the legs through there. It might be a case where sometimes especially if you haven't used a desoldering gun or a solder sucker to help you with the process, there might still be quite a bit of solder left over those holes. They might even be obstructing the holes, which can make it quite hard to get the prongs of the next battery through. In that case, you can always heat it up and actually poke something through it, like a little pin or something like that, to create a hole. But I would advise just using a desoldering gun, even once you've removed the battery. I don't really need to here, but if there was quite a bit of residue solder left on top of there, I might well use my desoldering gun and heat it up and have another crack at removing some of the solder that's there. But now we can move on to the next stage, which is reapplying our new battery. Okay guys, so next stage, before we actually put our new battery in, we're going to actually apply some flux. This is a flux pen. It is essentially just works like a kind of a magic marker or something. Inside here is a liquid flux. You can actually give it a little shake before you start if you like, and you simply apply pressure by pushing the knob down and onto the unit, push it down, and then the liquid will come out, the flux will come out, and just put that over both joints. Flux basically works as a bonding agent for the solder. So you can do a joint without flux, but it makes a lot better connection and a lot better chance of making a good connection if you use flux. So I definitely would advise that. Your solder will have flux core in it anyway, generally. This is Flux-Core Solder. There is different kinds of solder. Make sure you don't get what do you call it, solder they use for plumbing. That's definitely not what you want to use. And you can get lead solder still. I mean, lead solder is better than unleaded, but in today's world, it's quite hard to really get hold of lead solder still from a lot of big suppliers, although I'm sure you can buy it still on the internet. And if you're just doing small soldering joints like this, a bit of lead solder will probably be better. But anyway, I've got a lead free, and we're now ready to solder our new battery in. So we'll take our new battery, and we want to ensure that we get the right side. We need to get the positive side into the right hole. Now, when we removed the last battery, positive was down here, which is the larger hole. So there's two different size holes. You've got a big one and a small one. We're going to put the positive into the big hole. So the positive is the prong that's stuck to the top. Put the other one through on the other side. Now what I like to then do is turn it over and just bend it down a bit, because particularly these batteries I've got here, they don't really sit that well in the holes. So I just bend the prongs down, and that should seat the battery quite nicely now on the board. Okay guys, so as you can see, I'm working with quite a weird angle here to try soldering with, because I've got all these cameras in front of me. However, we are going to try our best to make this work. It's not my ideal method for soldering, but here we go. Now I've got my iron at 340 degrees Celsius at the moment, which I think is quite a nice working temperature. And what we're going to do is simply going to, actually before we do, I'm just going to tip my, tin my tip, which I have a bit of tip tinner over there, which I've already used, but you can just do it with a bit of solder like this. Put a little bit of solder on like that. That's how we know that our iron is at the right temperature as well, is how quickly our solder melts onto our iron. So a bit of tip tinner on there, put it into the wire wool, clean off any excess, and then we should be ready to go. So again, I'm using a funny angle here to try and get this to work, so fingers crossed. But anyway, what I'm going to do is apply a bit of heat here to the element, or the sort of the prong of my battery, and then just apply some solder to the joint. That wasn't great. There we go. There's already a nice bit of solder there on there. The flux really helps. There we go, that should do it. Go up to the top here. Just going to use the iron to push that down a bit more. There we go. There we go, that should do the job. I'll just tidy that one up a little bit. It's not really need to tidy this up. I just like to try and make it look as nice as I can. The problem with this, these batteries that I'm using is that they there we go. That should do it. Because the prongs are a bit smaller than usual. For the hole that they've actually gone through, because the actual traditional batteries have a much larger, wider tip to them. Let's see if I can get a quick show. Can you see how wide that is? That is the positive end of the normal battery, and you can see how wide it is. Mine is just very, very thin, so it means I need to apply a little bit more solder than I would like to make it sit nice and tightly in the hole that it's in. But I think that should do the job. I'm going to take a little closer look at it in a minute and ensure that I'm happy with it. I might be able to see from here actually. I don't want to get my head in front of the camera, but yeah, I mean that looks like it should do the job fine. You can give it a little wiggle, feels fairly secure, the battery there. So yeah, I think we're happy with that, guys. All right, guys, so the next thing we want to do before we put this back together and give it a test is just to clean off any residue flux from the board. Because, you know, if you leave flux on the board, it can potentially lead to corrosion. So again, isopropyl, Q-tip, nothing special there. Same as we were doing before in our last video. And just kind of polish around the area. Pick up any leftover flux. If it's looking a little bit brown around some of the joins, that's just because that's where the flux has melted from the heat of the soldering iron. There's nothing to worry about. These PCBs can handle pretty high temperatures, so you don't have to worry too much about really doing too much damage. You do have to be a little bit careful with your iron in terms of where you put it. I mean, you don't want to be like, if you can see these black line, these green lines here that are connecting everything, you don't want to be scratching through those. You can put a little bit of surface wear to them. That's not the end of the world, but you certainly don't want to scratch through them hard, because that is obviously the connection of travel around the board. So if you scratch through it, it's repairable if you do scratch through it, but it's not something you want to do. You can repair it with solder, but again, it's just you know, just be careful. Anyway, that should do for that. And it's always good value once you've got your board open like this, just to clean the contacts. You can maybe get a little bit of flux on the contacts during the process, then that's not what you want. That could inhibit things later. But we don't need to see that, guys, because you know, you can see my video on how to clean a board, and if you haven't, click in the top right corner now. Hopefully that should be there, or if not, just search on my channel. But yeah, we're not going to go through that again on camera, so we'll see you in a minute for the game check. Guys, I just need to talk about one more quick thing before we move on to the game check, because if I don't, I'm positive that in the comment section below I will be receiving a dozen comments from people telling me, oh, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention this. So for the sake of thoroughness, I will mention the fact that yes, it is definitely possible to install a battery housing into your cartridge for a CR2302 battery, which will allow you to put that battery into the housing without needing to solder it in. You will need to solder the battery housing into the actual battery in a similar fashion that we've already gone over in this video. However, once that's installed, yes, it is possible to change the battery whilst it is powered by your Super Nintendo, allowing you to avoid losing the saves that are on that actual cartridge. The reason I haven't gone through it today is, well, there's a number of reasons. The first one being that those battery housings, you can get quite thin ones nowadays. I think that they have released some really quite thin ones, but they still are quite bulky, and you do need to be careful to install them very flush, or as flush as you possibly can get them, into your cartridge which is a little bit harder than just installing a normal battery where you've got a little bit of wiggle room. Because if you don't do that, you will struggle to actually close the plastic housing around your board. At the end of the day, with these batteries lasting, you know, certainly 10 years, even these cheap modern ones, I'm sure we'll probably get 10 years out of them. And if we're lucky, we'll be pushing 20 years like we've already experienced. At the end of the day, realistically, after 10 to 20 years, don't you just want to play the game again from beginning to end? I don't really, especially with Super Nintendo, I'm just like, how much time are you going to put into a game for you to care in 20 years' time about losing it? Anyway, it's time to check the game that we have already done and make sure that it still works. Okay guys, first things first, let's check that the actual cartridge still works. There we go. Everything's fine there. So all we need to do now is of course get to a save point, save the game and hope for the best that everything's there. So we can see there's no data on the game now. I'm now going to play through the game a little bit and get myself to a save point, save it, and we shall check back in after that. Okay guys, we are just started a new game and I just realised, having run around for a little while, that actually I could just save in the very first room I started in. So we can do that here. Test, here's our save. We'll save it now. And we shall check to see if it's worked. Now there's no point just hitting reset because reset will still be powering the battery through the mains, so you really need to turn the power off fully. It's a very important when you, especially dealing with old cartridge games like this, that when you turn off the power, you hold reset and then you take the power out. That goes the same for the NES as well as Super Nintendo, probably the Mega Drive as well. It just protects those batteries from any surges that may occur. So hold reset, turn the power off. I can take the game out as well just to be sure. I mean, that doesn't make any difference, but we'll just do it anyway. Game back in, hold reset, power on. You don't actually need to hold reset when you power on, to be honest. That's just me being pedantic, but it's a good habit to get into. Now, as long, if the battery was soldered properly, we should have a game here now called Test. There we go. So there you are guys, a new battery installed in Terranigma, and we're ready to carry on with another 20 to 20 plus years of gaming.